Nicole Mockler from the University of Sydney. You're very welcome to Dublin and to the Institute of Education here at Dublin City University. Enjoying Dublin so far?
Oh, absolutely, Anne. Very much so.
And really sorry that you're not going to be here for St. Patrick's Day and all the shenanigans.
Absolutely.
But you're making
very
the most
poorly
of it. Planned. Yeah, very poorly planned. But we're glad to have you here to deliver the first Dean's Lecture. An intriguing title. Nicole, do you want to remind us what it is?
Yes, I've called it Are We There Yet? 25 years of reform and reform and reform and reform of teacher education in Australia.
So you're presenting teacher education, or the reform of teacher education, as something of a holy grail. Is it?
Well, we've certainly been through a few rounds of reform since the late 1990s. So I'm going to draw on some of my, my kind of origins as, in history training to excavate some of those reforms over that period of time. So I'm going to look at 4 different sets of reforms from beginning in the mid to late 90s and continuing on to the present day.
That's a lot of reform, even by the standards of the most enthusiastic policymakers. Is there any kind of underlying theme or trajectory that's kind of driving this? I mean, that's a lot of change in teacher education. In an Irish context, we think we've gone through a lot of reforms, but actually what strikes me is that we've been quite stable for an extended period of time. But what's driving those reforms in Australia?
Look, I mean, I think at the heart of it, there is a desire on the part of policymakers to provide the very best education for teachers. So I don't think it comes from a kind of a nefarious position. But I think that often what happens is that, the anecdotal evidence points in a certain way. And so we think, we need to get in there and make that happen. And I think that policymakers are often drawn to, things that might present themselves as kind of silver bullets. And so, I would say that the trajectory of reform has been around, discussions around attracting the best and brightest into teaching, discussions around quality assurance of teacher education. And, I'm certainly not going to argue against quality, and I'm not going to argue against the need to get the best and brightest into education. But I think that some of these discourses have driven us to a point where we're kind of constantly going around saying, we need to fix it, we need to fix it. And I think it would be probably helpful for us if we got off the reform bandwagon for a little while and actually allowed some of the reforms to sink in far enough so that we can work out exactly what kind of benefit they're having.
It strikes me that within Australia too, there has been some structural reforms in teacher education. So you have a lot of teacher education happening within university settings, including in your own. I think.
Yes.
Are you a graduate of the university where you currently work?
I am indeed a graduate of the University of Sydney.
So
yes.
You trained as a secondary school teacher within a university setting.
I did.
Now, in an Irish context, we're quite strongly focused on preserving teacher education within a university setting, in contrast perhaps to the developments in England, which have a different orientation. What's the position in Australia in respect of teacher education in universities?
So the position in Australia is very much more aligned with the Irish kind of position on that than the English one. I think that the kind of argument around student teachers needing more practical experience, in another place and time, it could have kind of pushed us down a path toward more a kind of school-based model. So far, however, that's not the case, and there are a very strong kind of set of regulatory structures around the length of time that teacher education courses need to take, the number of days of professional experience that student teachers need to do in schools in order for those programs to be accredited. And so we haven't moved to that point of trying to embed the teacher education in school in the same kind of way. We're very strong on school partnerships and trying to develop partnerships that are long-term and perhaps not the kind of relationships that universities had in the 90s and 2000s where, they were probably far more just about student placement. And so universities have really been encouraged over the last decade and a half, I would say, to form relationships with schools that are about not just initial teacher training, but also around kind of professional development for in-service teachers and, relationships that are kind of more enduring and that perhaps bring academics into schools more to work alongside teachers.
And all of which feeds into an idea that's very powerful in Ireland, which is of the continuum of teacher education, the initial teacher education, the continuing phase. But I really like that idea of then building partnerships around that. And I think we're just beginning on that journey here. One of the things that is interesting in an Irish context is the way in which universities view teacher education. So you're here in Dublin City University, we're a full faculty of education here. And we take our seat with the other faculties at key decision-making moments of the university. How is teacher education regarded by universities in Australia?
We still have a small number of faculties of education left in Australia, but I would say that over the last decade in particular, university structures, many universities have been restructured around kind of large faculties, and prior, faculties of education have been subsumed into larger faculties of arts and social sciences or humanities or colleges of, education, arts and so on. So I would say that, there's probably been a move away from that over the last 10 years. I don't think that that's necessarily, it's necessarily a reflection on the place of teacher education in Australian universities so much as it is about the way that Australian universities are structured and the fact that very few disciplines actually are left as standalone faculties. Most universities have disciplines that are subsumed into these larger faculties.
So it shouldn't be seen as a reduction in the status of teacher education or of education as a field of studies. It's rather about avoiding singular disciplines being kind of isolated in silos.
Yeah, I think so. I know that the experience often of academics who are in faculties of education that are subsumed into larger faculties, sometimes it does feel to them as though there's been a kind of diminishment in their response, in their level of prestige within the university. And certainly not having a dean who is on the university executive and, who can kind of directly speak into that space is perhaps a marker of that. But I would say that in the Australian context, those moves have been part of broader moves. It hasn't been about let's take education and put it into arts. It's been about broader questions of university governance.
So we're looking forward to hearing all about that in the lecture this evening, but I couldn't let you go without asking you about the book and the book being about the way in which the teaching profession has been represented in the media in Australia. And you've described yourself, you've said yourself how unusual it is for an academic publication to become viral, but in fact as an academic book it's been talked about around the world, but it's also been talked about in Australia, and I'm particularly interested in the reaction to the publication and the analysis that you've done, that incredibly quite a unique analysis. That it must be the combination of the history teacher and the classicist and the English teacher in you of that. Was it 60,000 articles?
Yeah, there were about 65,000.
65,000 articles where you looked at how teachers are represented in the media. Why was there such a strong reaction to it, do you think?
Look, I think it hit a chord with members of the teaching profession, and I think I think it's one thing to say, well, we're going to look at very small instances and take carefully grouped articles. A lot of that work I've done myself, and find that teachers are represented in a negative way, or that, there are complex representations. I think it's a different thing to take 65,000 articles over a 25-year period, and to say, well, here are some patterns that I can discern here. And I think for many teachers and other educators, it really resonated. And, they saw in that depiction of those patterns over that period of time, a kind of confirmation of their own experience and their own feelings about the way that their profession was written about in the press, and, the kind of feelings that they would have over their breakfast cereal as they're reading the Sydney Morning Herald, for example, and thinking this is not a great representation of my profession. We're kind of, I guess, confirmed in that analysis.
So the reason why the book was so widely discussed and was even discussed here, I think you wrote about it in the conversation, we picked it up in The Guardian as well, was the fact that for so many Australian teachers, when they they read what you had written, it confirmed what they had experienced and felt about themselves and the impact on their professional identity over an extended period of time.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that those arguments resonated with them because they were things that they experienced and that they felt that they had good anecdotal evidence of. But then you never know. Am I just drawn to these articles because I am a teacher, because, you know, this is my thing?
Or am I too sensitive? Is it just me? Do I need to just develop a thicker skin?
That's right.
Yeah.
Is it that I only ever look at the articles that, you know, I only ever clock the articles that have negative depictions in them, and, you know, maybe there are all of these other ones out there that, you know, I might read, but it doesn't impact on me in that way. But to see the patterns kind of writ large over that 25-year period, I think that was something that really resonated with a lot of teachers.
I think there's a piece of work to be done here in Ireland on that, certainly over the last 15, 20 years, and looking at how teachers have been represented in the media. And perhaps we too could go back an extended period of time. During the pandemic, a final thought, did attitudes to teachers or representations of teachers' work, did that change in the media in Australia?
Certainly my analysis went up to 2020, so it included all of 2020. Certainly the way that teachers were positioned in media articles in 2020 was quite different. The whole discussion was about, you know, about lockdowns and about teaching online and about the difficulty for parents of navigating the student learning. And so certainly the way that we talked about teachers in 2020 was different. It's a very different year of the corpus. But I think there's a job to be done now in actually looking at what's happened since then. So, you know, we had a second year of lockdowns in many Australian cities in 2021, and then in 2022 coming out of those lockdowns and, you know, back to face-to-face teaching and learning in all schools during 2022. So looking at, you know, what's happened in those 2 years kind of post that initial year, I think it'll be interesting to see how far things have bounced back. And my hunch, having just collected that data and not really systematically analysed it yet, is that in fact there has been a bit of a bounce back, and that you know, the discussions might be slightly different, but I don't think that we'll see that there's that much difference between 2019 and 2021, for example,
in the way that teachers are represented and in the mainstream media.
Yeah, I think we've gone back to a discussion of teacher quality that we were having for many years leading up to the pandemic.
We're looking forward to your lecture this evening. Just to remind us again, because we should really allow you that moment to plug the book of its title and its publishers here in Europe.
Yes, that's right. It's Bloomsbury Academic, and the book was called Constructing Teacher Identities, How the Print Media Define and Represent Teachers and Their Work.
And I can tell you, it's well worth the read. We look forward to hearing you later. Thanks very much, Nicole.
Thanks very much, Anne.